Yay, I got a little bit of a response. How are you guys doing today? It's been an amazing conference. I love seeing how much is going on just in hallway conversations around, especially when you have a robot running around. It's kind of fun. Have you seen that? I think it's pretty cool. Oh, man. Well, welcome to Google versus Alexa, Battle of the Bots. Now, I call it a battle, but it's a little bit of a misnomer. Because what's actually happening here is I'm going to talk to you about how to support both of them. But because people want to know what is it like to develop on one platform versus the other, how they are different, and how we can ascertain what is the same, especially when it comes to extending the existing business logic we have in our own ecosystems. But before I get started with that, I need a volunteer. It's really important that I have a good volunteer that's willing to be really fast to come up to the stage. It will happen at any point in time. I'm not telling you when. I just need a volunteer. Volunteer. No volunteers at all. All right, cool.
Now?
Not right now, but I will call on you next. So you can just be right here in the front row. All right, cool. And what's your name?
Arvid.
Right, Arvi?
Yeah, try to pronounce that. Arvid.
Arvid. All right, yes, I got it. All right. You will be our volunteer. So let's talk about why any of this matters, shall we? This has been the first two main devices that have come out in the past several years. There are many other voice assistants. There are many other devices that you can actually build yourself, but these are by far the most popular. So this is what is starting to matter to us as developers. My goal here is to explain a little bit about how they work and how they are becoming much more important to our ecosystem. Because by 2021, according to Gartner, more than 50% of enterprises will spend more every year on bots and chatbot creation than mobile app development. That's a pretty big statement. And you think, oh, that's not really true, is it? But I promise you, everything is heading that direction, especially because I get to work at an amazing place called VML, which is a really big global advertising and marketing company. So I get to build lots of temporary microsites, I build mobile apps, I do voice now, and I can tell you that all of the enterprise clients that we have are like, what can we do to support a mobile interface? And I said, okay, well, we do this. 10 years later, everybody does mobile. So now, all the same group of people are coming back and saying, we need to support voice, don't we? And I said, yes, we do. And so this is a survey globally that they did. And in general, they tend to get it right. So this is a good investment of your time as a developer to kind of look at what it means to develop in this space. I had some questions when I got started, okay? I had 7 years of .NET. That's all I had. I've only done big Fortune 500 companies, board applications, right? Like the ones that we're used to. So would they even have a space here? Well, since if you've ever worked on mobile devices, you know that the answer is yes to everything. So I had questions about getting started in this. I wanted to know, how does the skill work? I needed to know, where do we program it? What kind of concepts do I need to know? What about debugging and testing? That was a big question that seemed to evade me. How do you just make a basic skill with a service? Because a lot of the examples, like the Hello World examples, did not use a web service or a microservice like that. I needed to know, can it take dynamic user input? That was a big question. What about expressiveness? Do I have any control over what the voice is saying back to me? Can the responses be updated by people who are not me? Because I don't want to be called at 2 in the morning to update the way that one of these devices are saying something. Can I hand that off to somebody who does content creation? I needed to know also, can I change the responses based on the input I get from the user? And does every response have to be scripted? Now, I'm sure, as we are at NDC Oslo, and you guys are all very brilliant, you probably already know the answers to these questions. But because I approach everything freshly, these are the things I needed to answer. So these are the kinds of things we're going to go through today, and what you guys should keep in mind. So how does the skill work? Well, for both of these, it kind of comes down to 3 basic principles. There's some sort of user interactive device, whether it's a phone or one of these speakers, and through their own ecosystem, they've actually done natural language processing for you. So you're going to go through their system instead of doing it yourself. Can you do it yourself? Absolutely. There's a GitHub project for everything. But should you? The answer is usually no. And why would you? Because at least all this is done for you. That allows you to focus on your business logic and leverage the ecosystem's capabilities. Google has a whole lot of options of things that you can leverage their APIs, and the same thing with Amazon. So it depends on what you're trying to accomplish. But either way, it's a good idea to be a part of these ecosystems because you're easily discoverable. It's really important that somebody can find you there. Just like mostly nowadays, people don't say, do you have a business card? They say, can I find you on Instagram? Can I find you on Facebook? Can I find you on Twitter? Right? Those are ecosystems that you did not build, but you are on. It's exactly the same for this. And this is the quickest way that voice is growing. So this is kind of a real basic version of what it looks like to communicate from user through device. It goes through a cloud service that you would eventually hook up to some sort of a database or webhook, and then return all that back to the speaker. That's right, it's cloud-based. None of this is localized, which means it needs the internet in order to debug. The same thing for Google Assistant, or in this case, it is actions on Google that leverages Google Assistant. It's like an extra step in there that's kind of wrapped around an action. That's what we have here, this conversation action. You would invoke this skill of yours, and it would, actions on Google, I'm going to try not to fall off the edge here, and actions on Google would say, hey, this looks like it's a Google Assistant action. Maybe you should go to the next part and fulfill that, and the fulfillment webhook sends it off to your service, and then down the line. This is what it kind of looks like to utilize like a smart home skill. So on Alexa, you can send things kind of into the ether. The user can just say something, and Alexa doesn't have to speak back. You can just turn on a light bulb, operate a garage door, or decide your entire army of little drones will suddenly rise up into the air. That was fun for me to do this last summer. It's to be able to say something like, Alexa, tell my drones to rise, and they just go. It was very, very cool, really scary to people, but it was fun for me. And it's just another example of things you can do that maybe you didn't think about. The same thing for Google Home. It just kind of starts with that basic voice command, goes through the conversation API, and you can, if you want to, leverage other things like if this then that to also hook that up if you're interested in modularizing your code instead. So this is kind of the flow explained much more in a dialogue sense. This is the flow for an Alexa skill. As you can see here, the customer just asks a question, and then Alexa does the work of that natural language processing, and then hands it off to Alexa skill. And what you are expected to do is return both a voice response and some sort of visual if you want. And the reason that there would be any sort of visual interface being brought back is for recollection, for summary, or perhaps you want to just send a reminder. And in that case, it would be sent to the Alexa app on the phone. Now, you don't have to do that, but it is an option. And the flow for Google Assistant is one that I actually have been familiar with for years because I've been using Google Voice for years. Before Siri came out, Google had Voice. Right. So the way that this ecosystem works is that you would just start up by talking to your device, which of course would hand it off to Google Assistant. Google Assistant would be like, well, this is a custom something, so I need to hand that off to Actions on Google to help fulfill. And then you can take it from there, from your database or whatever you want to do to fulfill it. This sounded fine. There's a lot that is possible in their conversation API. But it can be a little bit confusing when it comes to how to handle back and forth dialogue. And that's why they added what is formerly known as API.ai has become dialogue flow. And so this actually allows you to hook up this turn-by-turn kind of conversation. It is unique to Google, and that's not something that Alexa has exactly. They have something similar, but it's not quite the same. So this is, again, another layer in between that just kind of makes it a little bit easier for you to hook up to your skill. So, where do we program it? This is a great question. There are a couple of different places that you can leverage all of this. There is Alexa Voice Service, which you could use directly. This allows you to stream audio into it, and then it goes ahead and fulfills the rest of your skill. The Conversation API through Google also allows you to do the same, but I like templates. So I was wondering, is there an easier way to start a voice skill? Turns out there is. So on the Alexa ecosystem, we have Alexa Skills Kit, which just makes it a little bit easier to templatize the way that you are setting up your skills. And the same thing for Dialogflow. And I can tell you, after messing around with both Alexa Voice Service and Conversation API directly, it is much easier to use these. You don't have to, but I don't think most skills need to go down to that level. So this is kind of what the dashboard looks like. It has undergone a little bit of changes over the years for Alexa, but it's pretty easy to find out where everything is on your dashboard. Over here to the left, you will notice a couple of things under intents, and we'll go into what those are in a minute. But I like that everything is easy to find. Dialogflow also does a very fresh, focused type of a dashboard. So I have everything over to my left and everything over to my right. It's very clear. The user design is pretty good. So these are the two portals that you would interact with in order to set up your skill. Okay? And what's great about Dialogflow is that you can integrate with tons of other things. But I want to draw your attention down to the bottom right-hand corner. Notice that it doesn't have direct integrations there. That's because you need to export the Dialogflow dialog every time you need to make a change and then upload it into the portal for Alexa, because that's what they decided to do. So, what concept should I know about this? This is another question that I needed to know. Turns out that there was a great talk at Google I/O in 2017 talking about voice concepts. And this is the one that I took away from it that I thought was very strong. This has to do with how successful your voice skill is. If you build a skill that is high in quality, it doesn't overwhelm you with how much content it has, it's relevant to what the user wants to know about, and the manner in which you're communicating is very clear, you will be successful. So I have this up on my wall at work that says, make sure that we are being truthful to the user, we're brief, relevant, and clear. And every time we've done this, our voice skills have hit it out of the park with our clients. So this is the same thing that you need to consider, which is interesting because I don't do design. I much prefer to be the wizard with the magic. You know, I like to make things functional. I don't want to make things pretty. But you have to blur the lines a little bit when it comes to voice. You have to think about why you're doing this, how you're doing this, and yes, us people who like to hide behind a computer have to learn how humans communicate. And so it actually has made me a much better communicator as kind of a side effect. This was one of the principles I thought was fascinating, is the cooperative principle. Has anybody ever heard of this before? No? Awesome, I have fresh faces. Okay, so I'm going to take you through a little bit of a dialogue right now, okay? This is a real one that actually happened, and also actually last year. So before we get to that, because that was apparently not the slide I was expecting, we will go into what the difference is between a happy path and a cooperative path is. Normally, I would do something like this. I would set my alarm, and the user interface would say, okay, what time? I would give them the day and the time, and I would get a confirmation. But a cooperative path means you may not be getting every parameter to fulfill your function. In fact, you probably won't, because studies have shown that people who only engage with voice and have no other visual thing to look at tend to multitask and lose their place and run around and have to repeat themselves. So the likelihood of you getting that completely, like 100% every single parameter fulfilled is actually kind of low. So that kind of restructures the way that we build our code, right? In this case, a user's only giving me a piece of the information, if you notice on the right here. It's, I just want to set an alarm. Well, that's not enough information to fulfill anything. So if I was the phone company, if I was perhaps your gas or electric company, I might be like, you gave me no information. No, reject you. Come back to the beginning. And that is why people have such a hard time with chatting with AI bots, right? Because unless you have some sort of cooperative path that you've put in here, it's really hard for a user to know what to do. There is no menu. They just have to know. My memory is terrible, so I'm definitely going to forget every time I have to call that phone company what it is I'm supposed to say. It's much easier if I just tell them what it is I want. And in this case, I'm just saying, hey, just set an alarm. And if the user interface comes back and can prompt for the additional pieces of information, like what time or what day, and if they only piecemeal it out, if they only give me one parameter at a time, yes, you have to come back and say, hey, can I have this other piece? That doesn't mean you make them stop and start over and bring you all three at the same time. That is the difference here. So why does this matter to us? Because we have no visual interface. That isn't the front-end developer's job. That isn't the UX designer's job. That's your job, because you are handling every request that comes in, and that does change what you do. So, conversational implicature was actually the slide I was thinking of when I was trying to talk about this real conversation that happened. So conversational implicature is fascinating to me, because this is the study of what communication really is in human beings. So Jacob had a conversation with Todd last year that says, I really need a drink. And then Todd responded, have you been to the Scotsman? There's a few things that are implied here, right? It implies that the Scotsman serves drinks. Because usually when someone says, I really need a drink, they're not usually meaning water. Sometimes, but not usually. It also means that perhaps it's open for business, right? Maybe it might be open currently. And that it might be nearby. Because why would you suggest something that's in Timbuktu? That doesn't make any sense, right? It also might be a place that some third-party person might like who's standing in the group and has said nothing but was included in that response. So think about that. If you kind of look at what the percentages are of communication, what we say is actually quite low on the scale. So how do we handle this as an assisted kind of a skill? Because this is what drives adoption. This is what makes people want to use it, is when it feels like it knows what to do, feels like it knows you. And the only way it can know you is to start ascertaining some conversational implicature in some of this. But that sounds really impossible. However, it's not. How many of you are on Facebook? Anybody? Yeah. Do you see ads that are relevant to the things that you talk about? So in a way, that is monitoring the things that you've been saying to give you a better experience. We can do the same thing for voice, right? Especially if you hook it up to your own ecosystem and you know a little something about your user. That's nice. I hate repeating myself often. Like, you already know where I live. Just when I say, hey, I need something here, don't make me go through the laundry list of steps to get there. If you already know where the user is, just give them a filtered search result so they don't have to think about it. Right now, our phones do this quite well, but for some reason, a lot of times, the voice skills that have been put out in the stores haven't really been up to the same par, and I thought that was interesting. So clearly, it was just because developers were afraid to get their hands dirty in voice, and I promise you, it's not that bad. So let's talk about some concepts. When I use the word intents, I think about them as events. That you are intending to fulfill something that the user wants. It isn't necessarily what they say, it's what they're intending. It's what they meant, right? And I think about them as events that kind of fire over either platform. This is an example of what the JSON structure kind of looks like for Amazon Alexa. And I know it's undergone some changes a little bit, but it's pretty simple. It's just straight JSON. And it's really pretty similar as well for Google Assistant. So it just says, hey, this intent fire, which means this user said something that means that they intend to get a response from you in this category, right? So sample utterances are part of what drives the identity of what a user says. I kind of think of them as like a one-to-many relationship, okay? So you can ask what time is it in many different ways, not to mention many different languages. We're sticking to one for right now, but you can have many different ways to get the same result, right? You need to provide some samples to these ecosystems so that they know kind of what you're saying, and then they can ascertain a little bit more over time as you train them. Invocation name is a concept that I wasn't sure I understood exactly, but it is the name of your skill, but it's not necessarily what they say to get to your skill. It may or may not match at all. So for instance, if you have a very long name, and I am in Scandinavia, so you have lots of long words, right? Lots of long names. Maybe it's too long for a user to constantly be calling it that. Maybe you wanted it to call something more fun, like my shortcut app, or instead of like the whole name. So this is whatever the user has to say to invoke your specific skill. Otherwise, they're just talking to Amazon or they're just talking to Google. They're not talking to you. And this is something that I see users do often, is that they're like, hey, I want an answer to this question. And Google goes, well, I can't help you with that. Okay. Because it didn't point it towards your specific skill. Make sense? The other concept was endpoint or fulfillment. Fulfillment is what Google calls their webhooks or any sort of endpoint that you want to give to them. An endpoint, of course, is on Alexa. They're the same thing. They just form a response to your voice assistant request. Do you have to use them? No. You do for Alexa, but you don't have to use that for Google. You can actually use Dialogflow directly and build your entire skill right in there. But because I work for these big Fortune 500 companies, they want to know, how do I leverage all the code we already wrote, all that business logic we already wrote, and be able to serve up something meaningful in the voice space? So the way you would do that is by providing an endpoint or fulfillment webhook for this ecosystem to hook into. This is kind of what it looks like on Alexa's dashboard. And this is what it looks like on Google Assistant. So now I'm starting to see a little bit of a correlation. I'm like, okay, I think we can do this. We can do this. There is a note that, depending on, I can't remember which one it is, but one of these ecosystems don't want you to reuse an endpoint. So I can't just have a voice endpoint. I have to have one specifically for Alexa and one specifically for Google Assistant. Now, you can share all that same code. You just have to have a separate endpoint so that it can be authenticated against and tested against, and they can make sure that nobody else is trying to hit it and take your service down. Make sense? So I have an example of this that I will show you in a minute. And then this was just an example of an inline editor that you can use directly in Actions on Google. I think it's pretty cool. And for some reason, I did not turn this off. I am so sorry. Let me do that now. There we go. Okay. Last one is portal configuration. I spent a lot of time here. It controls the publishing, like when you send it off to be published, to go out into the real world. And it also optionally can allow you to have those templated conversations. So if you're interested in looking at what the documentation is currently, because it does change often, for Alexa, you can go to developer.amazon.com/Alexa. And Actions on Google is developers.google.com/actions. So actions can have many, many different meanings, and one of them just has to, one of them you can use is for Google Assistant. So you can use actions for other things, okay? This is just where you get started if you want to know how to set up a project. All right. So what about debugging and testing? Everybody has a different answer for this. But for me, I'm a .NET developer, like I said. I've done other kinds of development as well. I just find it very easy to set up a web service, right? So if you deploy out to Azure, the nice thing is you can do remote debugging. So every time a request comes in, I can hit a breakpoint in Visual Studio in my code. I think that's pretty nice. Does it work 100% of the time? Depends on your Wi-Fi, but mostly it does. And this is the one way I'm able to grab exactly what the user said and kind of compare it as to why things are failing. This was a godsend for me. Now, this is, another step as to how you attach. There are blog posts if you want to know. But inside of the portals, they themselves have testing as well. I just wanted to be able to get directly to my code whilst engaging these devices. So that was the reason I chose remote debugging for that. But you can test directly with each of these portals. So, I'm sorry, I want to make sure I have this all in here. So once you've enabled the testing for your skill, at least for Amazon Alexa, they have an entire page that's dedicated to this. So you can either speak directly into your laptop, you can see that little type or click and hold the mic here, or you can just type it out. Why would you choose to type it? Well, I'm lazy, and so I like to just copy scripts and paste it in there, and that's just what I like to do initially. But eventually, you want to test it with your voice because you want to kind of exercise what the NLP processing is doing on both ecosystems. Sometimes, if you have an accent and you're speaking a different language, in this case, if I tried to speak Norwegian, but I had an American accent, it may not actually pick up what I'm saying the same way that I intend it. And sometimes that can cause things to fail because they were unexpected, right? It doesn't mean that you have to do any of that processing, but it's something to keep in mind. This is the way that it looks on the Google Assistant. This is the actions on Google testing console. Sorry about that. And if you notice over on the top right-hand corner, you can also see how it works just in Google Assistant. And that's another tab over here that allows you to test it in and see the same. Both of these portals will show you the request and response in JSON, so you can debug them and at least go from there. And oftentimes, they'll show you any errors before you go too far. So, how do I make a basic skill with the service? This is a good question, right? This is kind of what it looked like, right? It's pretty simple. This is what my Alexa, bare bones, I just want to see if I can make something happen service looks like. This is a dynamic object I have. I just set a couple of attributes together and send it on its way. A couple of things I wanted to draw your attention to is at the very bottom. So the very bottom has should end session. So that has to do with how long, not how long, but whether or not you want Alexa to listen at the very end of what she says. Sometimes that's yes, sometimes that's no. So that's an important thing to keep track of. And if you notice under card, that is what you would see in your Alexa app on the phone. So with just this much code, I can get an app run and a skill running directly in a service in like maybe 30 minutes. And that's after the whole deployment cycle to Azure, right? That's pretty cool. It's even less code if you want to do it for Google. Now, you can use SDKs for both of these. You don't have to use .NET. I'm just showing examples as leveraging my existing skill set, what I did. Because at the end of the day, this is just JSON that we're using. There's a lot more helpful abilities inside of some of these SDKs, but I just wanted to show you that this isn't anything to be afraid of. It's not terribly, crazily magical. It's just JSON. Okay, look how little I have to do, and both of these will return me a result. So this one I've got, I think this is a video. Is this a video of me doing this? Yes. So this is me showing you what it's like to just test the skill that I'm going to show you in a second. I mean, all I had to do was test that in, and you kind of get to see like the application ID, how it comes through, any versions of that, and it shows you the output that your service sent to the device. I think that's pretty cool. And then if you want to, you can play and hear back what her voice would say. Also, this is the way that you would just test it out in Dialogflow. I really kind of like the helpful always on the right-hand side testing ability. I think that's pretty cool. And then once it updates it with any changes that you made, then it fires it off for you inside of the Google Assistant Simulator, allows you to do the exact same thing you did for Amazon. Pretty cool. So, can it take dynamic user input? This is the question of the century, isn't it? So, if a user knows what to say, everything is golden. Like, tell me what your sign is. There's probably, in the horoscope, only a certain number of signs, so I can preset that list. What if you don't have a list? What if it could be anything, like your favorite toy, your favorite song? That's another one. There's just so many options. Can it do this? Well, the answer is yes for both. The nice thing about Google Assistant is that their variables by default allow you to be dynamic. So you can just create an entity, in this case, that says, hey, at the end of this phrase, whatever the user says here, I want it. And that works by default in Google. There is a data type that you can use that I was able to successfully use today to show you called search query that works really well on Amazon Alexa's ecosystem. And they also have another one called a literal type. So both of these systems have really thought a lot about the kinds of skills that you guys would want to build. And this is probably one of the most asked questions on Stack Overflow is, can we be dynamic with our input? So yes, you can. And that brings me to, I think I already kind of explained that, is what slots look like. So this is an example of one that I kind of pulled directly from Amazon, but it actually would be the same for either one. When I talk about an intent, that is, remember that event, that's that action that you want to have kind of roped in, right? So you say, hey, I want to get the horoscope for a particular sign. That sign is a slot. So remember, we talked about that dynamic slot. And the sample utterances that you provide are kind of right there in the middle. They don't have to be formulated this way. Things can kind of be moved around a little bit, but this is how it kind of breaks down. So where it says get horoscope here over to the left, if you look at the way that you set up the schema for what your skill will do, that is the intent name. So that is what is sent to your service along with that slot. Or just, if you have no slot, it just says, hey, get horoscope was fired. You should probably give me a response that I can hand over to the user. Make sense? Any questions? Very good. Awesome. So I wanted to do a Jedi mind trick kind of application. I thought that would be fun. And this is kind of what it looks like to set it up, at least for Alexa right now, is I wanted some sort of wildcard input. So if you see down here at the bottom, I have a slot type of search query. And this allows me to wire that up. And if you look at the sample utterances, I don't know if the user is going to say this, this, or this, but here are examples of what the user might start with, and then whatever comes next, right? This is all the code that I wrote for it. Now, this is also not a clean code talk. This is just a how do I make this happen, and abstraction will come later. So this is as little as I needed to do here. The only reason I wrote comments is so you can understand how the dialogue flows, okay? All I had to do to pull this out was just to look directly in my object, which was just a plain old C# object. I took a look at what the JSON structures were in their developer docs and said, okay, I want to create an Alexa response like this. Okay? All I had to do is fill out what I wanted the title and content to be for the card on the phone and any reprompts. So if you say nothing for a while, Alexa will ask you something else that will allow you to fulfill this intent. In this case, if I'm not really sure what the answer is, I might hesitate. And this is a chance for you to rephrase. You could say the same thing, but it actually doesn't follow best practices. You're supposed to say something like hey, tell me where you want to go to eat dinner tonight. And if you say nothing, she might say something like, hey, where you want to go to eat dinner? It's not exactly the same, but it's a reminder of, hey, we're having a conversation here. Hey, what would you like to do? So that's what that output speech is right here. Notice that I set to my end session to false, so that means that she would listen after that. And down here at the very last line before return is last intent name. Now that is not part of the JSON structure, but what is great about this is that I can set up attributes that are key value pairs that get shuttled around with any sort of requests and responses that we get from Alexa, and the same thing with Google Assistant. So I created a key value pair called last intent so that I know where they are in the steps. So that means that I am managing the state of the dialogue. You don't have to do this. Dialogflow actually does that really nicely for you. But if we're going to abstract this away and handle it for both platforms, I would like to know which step they're on. So that is what that is right there. So let's do a little demo of that. Okay, let's see, hopefully this works. Alexa, start Jedi Master.
I'm ready to become a Jedi like you.
Cancel.
May the Force be with you.
All right, I need my volunteer. Yeah. So to prove that this works and I'm not just scripting it, I need somebody else to talk to her as well. So what you're going to do is just like in the movie, you just need to start with the word say or do. Tell her what to say. So once I turn her on, say, Alexa, ask Jedi Master to say whatever you want. It can be anything. So I'm going to give you an example, and I'll have you do the next. Alexa, start Jedi Master.
I'm ready to become a Jedi like you.
Alexa, say, may the Force be with you.
See if she does that.
May the Force be with you.
Nice. Cancel.
I didn't understand what you requested.
Isn't that
Say
live?
hope to hear a list of options or cancel to exit.
Cancel.
May the force be with you.
Nice. So you could have said anything. You could have said NDC Oslo is awesome. That's what I loved about this. It was really fun to do. I got to do that with a friend of mine earlier and say all sorts of things. So thank you. Give him a round of applause. Awesome. Okay. Doing good, doing good. All right. So let's talk about expressiveness. This is fun for me. While I do not like painting pixels, I think it's awesome to listen to music and watch movies. So I'm really engrossed in character development. And whatever you think, the more that we get better at our AI, the more human-like we tend to want it to be. Some people might disagree, but if you notice, if you don't, if you let children just play with these for a while, it kind of personifies them. They're like, hey, you were mean, don't talk to Alexa that way, don't talk to Google that way. Like, little kids will do this and say, no, they have feelings too, like us, right? A way that you can kind of help this along is to decide what kind of personality your skill has, which is great if you work in marketing and advertising, because we get to do things like, I wonder what kind of crazy cartoon voice we could do for this, right? There's a couple of options for this. Now, both of these platforms allow you to play audio files, short clips, not very long, but they'll allow you to play them. So technically, you don't have to have the assistant voice at all. You could just play something that was straight out of a movie, or maybe is recorded somewhere in pieces as responses to the user. So you can literally create an entire Tony the Tiger if you wanted, right? It's really fun to do. However, those require you to know what the responses are. So if I'm having a dynamic conversation, maybe I want to be able to have the assistant have the personality, the voice assistant have it. And I wanted to know how much that's possible. Turns out, W3 has an entire spec on this, and they have for 11 years. It's called Speech Synthesis Markup Language. And here's an example that I pulled from their website, if you would like to look at it. Notice it looks a lot like HTML and inline CSS, to me, anyway. I like that you can slow things down, speed them up, you can replace things. So if you notice about the seventh line, it says there's alias there that allows you to replace W3C with the phrase World Wide Web Consortium, because maybe the average user doesn't know what that is. You can decide what you want to turn around. So like URL is a good example of that. Well, the first time I put that out there, it was URL, right? I think I used Google Assistant for that. But I was able to alias that as I want you to say URL, right? Because that's something that we're familiar with and how we pronounce and how we say it. I like that you can separate sentences. You can change pitch. You can speed them up, slow them down. You can make them quieter. You make them louder. And each platform has their own little Easter eggs, I'd like to think of. So for example, Google Assistant allows you to switch very seamlessly between languages on the fly. I think that's awesome. But something that Alexa does that is super cool is she whispers. Like really creepy whispering. It's very fun to do for like story time, especially when I was doing Mad Lib stories for kids. And each one of these platforms has their own special ones, but all of them implement at least the basics of this spec, right? So if you're interested in learning what's possible for this, definitely check out W3 for that and go from there. So this is kind of an example of what I'm doing for my little Jedi skill here, right? I wanted to see if I can slow down the voice on Google Assistant, which I chose to be Kylo Ren because I could do a male voice on Google Assistant, and I wanted to know how slow and how low the pitch could be. And so you can play with this for hours. It's really fun to do. This was actually fun to do with my next door neighbor. She's 7, and she was able to play around with SSML with a lot of ease. So this is a great thing to do, especially for your junior developers or anybody who's coming around from front end. And I did the same thing, kind of, with Alexa as well, because I wanted her to respond in a certain way. So I was able to control certain words. If you've ever noticed, sometimes when certain words are spoken by these voice assistants, they're said kind of awkwardly. Well, you actually have a lot more control over that than you think. So this is one of those options for you. And a demo of this is just so fun for me. Yay. I'm so excited to show you this. Let's see if I can go ahead and bring this round. Yes. Okay. Hopefully you can hear everything. I'm going to change this so you can hear it now. Okay. Please don't pop. Yes. All right. Let's see how this goes. We'll see if this back and forth conversation works, shall we? Okay, Google. Talk to Jedi Master.
Okay, let's get the test version of Jedi Master.
Welcome, young Jedi. Today, you will learn the way to master your feelings, as in The Force Awakens.
Challenge me.
Haha, that's what the Resistance needs. Not some old failed husk of a religion. Do you understand now? Alexa, tell Jedi Master to challenge me.
Excellent. So that was just an example of what I was doing with Google Assistant, but I want to show you a video of that. I'm going to change this again. Oh, too fast. All right. There we go. Maybe. All right.
Do you understand now? Alexa, tell Jedi Master to challenge me.
You didn't fail, Kylo. Kylo failed you. I won't. Challenge me.
You need a teacher. I could show you the ways of the Force. Come with me, Alexa. To the dark side.
Get out of my head.
So they shared the same application the whole time. I loved that they were also able to invoke each other. What was neat about this is that you can take it even farther than that. This example was really fun for me. I wanted to know how we could keep track of the context of the conversation, because no matter what, I could have swapped the roles. Because I pulled all that out. I was able to keep track of the conversation by itself. So how do you do that? On both of these platforms, they allow you to store those attributes, right? It's context out is what it is called for Google Assistant, which is kind of the example I was trying to show you there. And that's where I would set that last intent to know the step. Now, this is great for step by step, but sometimes it might be completely dynamic. They can start on step 5. They can start on step 2. How do I deal with this? My brain was frying. I needed to know how to figure this out. So how do we even have responses updated by people that aren't me? Well, the good news is CMSs exist, and you can hook them up directly. I like using Drupal because it was very easy and headless for me to set up directly with their REST API, but there's also other great options like Firebase or Backendless, AWS. There's CloudKit that you can use as well. Or if you like getting your hands dirty, you can build your own CMS for the people to use. It doesn't matter. This has changed the game in enterprise voice skills for us, because we can hand this to our client and they can decide what kind of, which tweet do you want them to read today? Because maybe you wanted Google Assistant to read a specific tweet in a specific way. I represent a well-known burger company that does not have round patties in the United States, and they have great snark to a lot of their Twitter feeds. But instead of just allowing it to read the entire thing and going, this allows them to pull out one specific one and reformat it without the emojis to be read aloud by a voice assistant. And we did this through a CMS. Very fun to do. It's actually not that difficult when you think about it. So can you change those responses based on the user's input? Well, the answer is, of course. So I ended up using Watson's Tone Analyzer API for this. Is anybody familiar with IBM Watson? Yeah, a couple of you? I know that it won Jeopardy, but I didn't know if I could really use it for much. Turns out they have a sentiment analysis API specifically for this called Tone Analyzer. So the way that it kind of looks like is this. I would send it the basic text of what the user said, and then it would score it from 0 to 1, positivity and negativity, and it would also say, I think, based on what I've analyzed in this text, this user's quite polite. or this text is quite sad. And I really enjoyed using that because it allowed me to set something up in my CMS that says, okay, if you're going to respond to a user, how would you respond to a user that's angry? How would you respond to a user that's happy about the situation? You can actually make them a little bit more dynamic, but it's still kind of tied one for one. Or you can utilize the Azure Text Analytics API, and it looks very similar. It also scores it this way, and then if you have any Azure credits, it's actually cheaper for you to use this option. But it doesn't show you the sad, polite part, but it allows you to ascertain negativity and positivity on a scale. So I'm able to just look at that, the documents that I sent it, and any errors, and this is the basic JSON that I get back. So I thought that was really useful for this. But does every response have to be scripted that way? Do I have to know every single permutation of what kind of response I would do? Of course not. We have machine learning and deep learning now, which is actually what is being used by Amazon Alexa and Google Assistant. Each of them have their own supporting platforms of deep learning and machine learning so that even though you've given a list of sample utterances, it can keep growing based on what the users are saying and doing. It's very cool. But you can do the same things with the kinds of responses you are building. And it doesn't have to be crazy complex. For this, I used just the basic machine learning studio in Azure, and I was able to feed in some of those movie lines and say, give me the one that is sad. Give me one that is happy based on what this input is. And I'm able to dynamically build these responses. Now, of course, you don't know exactly what's going to be said each time, and you can control that. But sometimes it's great to mix things up, especially if a user uses your skill all the time. All the time. Yesterday, when I was able to watch another talk about Alexa, something that was brought up is that users are more likely to pay attention if you change a little bit about what you say, or you randomize the response each time. And I think that's very true, because ultimately, we are technologists trying to learn human communication, right? So I've spent a lot of time figuring out how to make this much more like a Jarvis and less like your phone company. And the reason that people are not embracing this is because developers have been lazy about how to build their responses. But this can be so cool. Even if you are doing insurance or healthcare, you can have a blast building the kinds of responses that are possible. So what should you keep in mind here? I've noticed that if you start off accessibility first, it works really well. In this case, obviously voice works really well for people who do not have vision or have poor vision. But it doesn't have to be just that. My mother knew what to ask Google Assistant without any training. She is a lot older than me, and she didn't have to look at a menu or push a button. She just asked a question, which ended up firing off a frequently asked questions section and filtering it down to the answer she needed, which is great, especially if you look on some sites that have very, very nested frequently asked questions, right? That can be really frustrating. We say, give me searchability. But maybe even if you can't fulfill that response, wouldn't you like to know what the user was trying to do? You can't really do that unless they take the time to fill out a comment form and send it in, and they're usually upset by that point, right? Wouldn't it be great if you could think about how to capture that on the fly? You can, because if you set things up an intent in a certain way, you can capture a wildcard text of what they said, and even if you can't fulfill it, you can at least log it so that you can send that off to your superior saying, hey, our users tend to ask this question and we have never filled it. So maybe we should add that in. There's lots of things to keep in mind there. You have to think about really spending time with your beta community, which is all over the internet, but they tend to be very helpful in sharing things and experiments that they've been doing. Make sure you leverage A/B testing for this and utilize that falter intent. So within my skill, like once you're in my skill, you're on my territory, right? So if you say something that I don't understand, I can prepare a response for that. It doesn't have to be Google Assistant or Alexa that does it for you, right? You can decide, hey, I don't really know exactly what you were saying, but maybe you can try one of these things are really helpful for that. remember that context is key. So there's often lack of linear navigation. Now, I gave you an example of step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but what if they start out at 8? You have to be able to handle that in your code. So remember that when you're setting up your project, that any one of your functions could be hit at will, right? It's just a little bit different way to think about it. And try to treat your first-time users a little different than your returning users. You don't have to give them the same spiel every time if you already know who they are, right? You can customize it a little bit, or you can cut right to the chase so they're not speaking very long. If you're interested in some additional resources that I have, I kind of did some research for you. And if you're interested in sequencing your intents in certain ways, there's a great blog post from FreeBusy that shows how you can do it yourself if you decide to not allow Dialogflow to do it or Alexa to do that. There's also some really fun audio examples on Bespoken about SSML that I thought was great. And then there's an LCARS example skill. Does anybody know what LCARS is? Yeah? What is it? It's the name of the computer in the USS Enterprise in Star Trek, right. So I thought it would be fun to talk to my assistants just like I was on the Enterprise. So I built a skill that is an example, front to back, of what you would need to deploy for, at least for Alexa. It was an example, that one. But I'm already building it for Google, and I'm improving on it even more. And I, unfortunately, can't name it certain things because of copyright, but it's really fun to see. It's in GitHub, and you're welcome to grab that to show you different kinds of responses. I really like that some of them are audio, some of them are not with audio, some of them require a slot, some of them do not. And you can just kind of see how I handle that. And then this voice design talk that I mentioned before by James Giangola is excellent. It's on YouTube. Please watch it. It was fantastic. My name is Heather Downing. Thank you so much for joining me today. Do I have any questions? No? No? Have an awesome conference.